Shana Tova. There are people, explains the Talmud, who koneh olamo b'sha'a echat, who acquire eternity in a moment. And for Joseph Welch, that moment occurred on June 9th, 1954. The context was a post-war America unnerved by fears of communist influence and subversion. Seizing on the popular mood, Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy famously brandished a list of supposed communist agents within the federal government and set into motion a crusade that would dominate American politics into the years to come. McCarthy's panels and hearings spread far beyond any single list of government employees and came to include law-abiding teachers, screenwriters, housewives, lawyers, and other public citizens. The combination of McCarthy's zeal, the complicity of men and women who condoned the violations of civil liberties as an acceptable evil relative to the perceived communist threat, and the timidity of so many others who either feared risking their own political or financial self-interest or being perceived as soft on communism, or both, provided an ample platform for McCarthy's crusade to take hold. As for the senator himself, even in the estimation of his own inner circle, it was political opportunism more than ideological conviction that drove his agenda. McCarthy was an ambitious, superlative-loving, bellicose showman and provocateur who could pull on the levers of the public imagination, and most of all, had mastered the media. As historian John Meacham writes, McCarthy needed the press, and the press came to need McCarthy. Between 1950 and 1954, the number of television sets in America quintupled from 5 to 26 million, and McCarthy's crusade came to dominate the rhythms of public consciousness. By 1953, McCarthy's sights turned to the defense establishment, a move that prompted a showdown with an Eisenhower administration and Pentagon who would not countenance an attack on Army morale in the midst of the Korean War. The public spectacle of the Army-McCarthy hearings were carried on live television as the Army counsel, a Boston lawyer named Joseph Welch, withstood the bully tactics of McCarthy and Roy Cohen, an ambitious lawyer on his team whose Jewishness, incidentally, served to protect McCarthy from charges of anti-Semitism. On the 30th day of the hearings, June 9, 1954, the denouement would arrive. McCarthy sought to impugn a young lawyer on Welch's own legal team as having ties to a communist organization. Famously, Welch responded, "Until this moment, Senator, I never really gauged your cruelty or your recklessness." When McCarthy barreled forward, Welch stopped him, uttering the immortal lines, "Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You have done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last? Have you left no sense of decency?" Even Cohen signaled to McCarthy it was time to back off, and the session came to an end. It was at that moment that the tide turned and Welch entered the annals of history. His words, amongst other factors, prompted McCarthy's support to evaporate. The Senate, led by the senior senator from Connecticut, Prescott Bush, voted in favor of censure, with 22 of the Senate's 44 Republicans voting to condemn McCarthy. Ignored by the press, ostracized by his party, McCarthy was finished. A heavy drinker, he died a broken man 3 years later of an inflamed liver at the age of 48. Some people believe that ours is an unprecedented era, a dystopian society, the likes of which we have never seen, worthy of a Philip Roth counter-history novel. Others point to past precedent, the McCarthy era, the Japanese internment camps of World War II, the combustible events of '68, the Sedition Act of 1918. Our nation's history does not lack for the Longs, the Lindberghs, the Wallaces and Coughlins, and the movements that they represented. Some claim that our moment is an aberration and will soon pass, while others contend that the last 70 years was the aberration, and our moment signals a return to the norm. Regardless of your historic sensibility, whether you believe history repeats or merely rhymes, the challenges of our age are self-evident. The toxic discourse, the media feeding frenzy, the peddling of fear and hate-mongering, the populist strains of nationalism, the attacks on our institutions of democracy, the blurring of lines between dissent and disloyalty, between truth and untruth. As we usher in this new year and take the pulse of our country, we know that the diagnosis is not good, that our fears far outweigh our hopes. My concerns, to be clear, are not directed at just any one individual. McCarthyism did not begin with McCarthy, and our present challenges neither began with any one election, nor for that matter will end at the conclusion of any given political cycle. There are hyperboles and hatreds here and abroad emanating from all sides of the political spectrum. I read the news and am reminded of Gandhi's response when asked what he thought of Western civilization. I think he replied, "It would be a good idea." But more to the point, in a democratic society, be it here, Europe, Israel, or anywhere, to assign blame solely on any one person is to abdicate our responsibilities as citizens, of voters, enablers, and bystanders that make possible elected leadership. To live in a democracy means that we concede that the fault is not in the stars, but it is in ourselves. Our leaders are symptoms, not causes. As Harry Truman once said, we get the government we deserve, and we deserve the government we get. We are all contributories, our actions and inactions calling us to account today. Today, my concerns are not directed at any one person, nor, for that matter, any one policy. My concern is more fundamental. As an American, as a Jew, as a human being, and most of all, as a father of four, saddened and distraught at raising children in an age in which it can be asked, have you no decency? Ours is a vulgar age, with a public square lacking in moral leadership. On our watch, there has been a degradation of discourse in the value of truth and in the belief of the infinite worth of every human being. We suffer from a paucity of decency, of acts of kindness, and most of all, in holding fast to the fundamental importance of being a mensch. There are at least two remarkable things about giving a sermon about the importance of decency. First, that we live in a time when to remind people to be a mensch may be understood as a partisan political act. Second is the very fact that such a sermon needs to be given at all. For this rabbi, I imagine someone here thinking, you went to rabbinical school to tell us to be kind? Today is Rosh Hashanah. There are people in this room who are here but once a year. Tell them to support Israel. Tell them to light Shabbat candles. Encourage them to give to Jewish causes. But being decent with such a small window, is this really how you want to allocate your leadership capital? My answer, having stipulated that you should all support Israel, light Shabbat candles, and give to Jewish causes, especially this one, is yes, absolutely. There is no more important message for you to hear this year. What is it that the Lord requires of you, asks the prophet Micah, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly before your God. This is the calling of the day, to make manifest the goodness of humanity, to cause decency, ours and that of others, to emerge. If for no other reason, this Rosh Hashanah, we need to be reminded to be decent and kind because it's a message that is not being championed with the frequency and volume that it demands. We are living through a perfect storm of forces, giving rise to adopt Harvey Milk's turn of phrase, a conspiracy of silence, where the very people who should be calling for decency have ceased to do so. It's not just those individuals who, for reasons of self-interest or political survival, have, despite possessing the political or financial capital to make a difference, have chosen to remain on the sidelines. Let someone else do it, they say. The markets are up. It's an election year. Better to play it safe. But religious leadership, too, for a variety of reasons, has been rendered mute. The Catholic Church, we know, has their own surus of late, diminishing their ability to elevate our nation's moral discourse. Alternatively is a deafening silence and often outright support from so many in the evangelical community who have made a utilitarian and ultimately Faustian bargain in abdicating their moral pulpit in order to secure judicial appointments or other packages of political benefits. Of these leaders, we are left to wonder, as one sort of ancient Jew once rhetorically asked, what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the world and lose his soul? And lest we Jews make the mistake of misplaced schadenfreude or smug self-congratulations, we too have our own fair share of moral reckoning to do. No different than the church, we have sins of commission and omission for which we must answer. Jewish leadership has proven just as capable of carrying out all of the abuses of our Me Too era and worse. But it goes further. Far too many in the Jewish community, like the evangelicals themselves, have provided moral cover and absolution to those individuals, no matter their indecencies and ethical lapses, as long as they remain committed to the security of Israel. Finally, and perhaps most perniciously, is the emergent and increasingly audible riff that Jews must make a choice between observance and ethics, or if you like it, Jewish survival and moral decency, that it's somehow untoward for a Jew to champion deeds of kindness, to seek to mend the world and work to improve a common humanity. It's an Orwellian hijacking of our faith, nothing short of a McCarthyism within our ranks, that if you're committed to decency and humanity as a whole, then your commitment to the Jewish future must be suspect. Such a thinking is dangerous, and no different than our evangelical friends, risks the possibility of one day waking up to a Judaism and a Jewish people that is no longer worth defending. It is wrong, morally and historically, to pit Jewish observance and decency as somehow antithetical to one another. It's never been either or. It's always been both and. The High Holiday Machzor teaches that it's repentance, prayer, and tzedakah that avert the evil decree, not, interestingly, Jewish observance or self-defense. On Yom Kippur, the prophet Isaiah makes clear that we have a commitment to observe the fast and feed the poor. It was a 19th century Lithuanian rabbi, Israel Salanter, who founded the Musar movement in response to Jews of his own era, who, though would never deign to eat non-kosher food, would be unscrupulous in their business practices. His was a movement of ethical renewal, driven by a desire to promote a life of mitzvot, of Jewish observance, and midot, character traits, anava, humility, savlanut, patience, tzedek, righteousness, emet, truth, nichuta, calmness, metinut, deliberation, amongst others. Each of these character traits as important as any other aspect of our faith. Mitzvot and midot, Torah and derech eretz. The story is told that Rabbi Salanter once encountered a pious Jew during these days of awe who was so engrossed in prayer that he failed to greet Salanter, whereupon Salanter chided him, saying, because you're so pious, that gives you the right to deny me a simple good morning? One does not acquire midot overnight. Life is a constant battle between our good inclination, our yetzer hatov, and our evil inclination, our yetzer hara. It takes study, reflection, practice, constant self-correction to make sure that it's our good inclination, in Lincoln's words, our better angels, that carry the day. You know, about a month ago, I was walking up and down Lexington Avenue, running errands on a Friday afternoon, cell phone at my ear, as Debbie was giving me a list of a million other errands that I needed to do before the arrival of Shabbat. And still on the phone, I was swiping my credit card at the Duane Reade on 84th and Lex, not even looking up at the cash register guy who was asking me if I wanted the receipt in my bag or not. And for reasons that I'm still unpacking, I stopped. I took a breath. I put the phone down, and I looked up at this human being in front of me, and I said something to the effect of, "And how is your day going today?" He smiled. He looked me up once and down, and he said, "I dig that lavender. It goes with your jacket." To which I looked down, noting he had noticed my sports coat shirt combo, and I smiled, and I said, "You just made my day. In fact, if you really like the combo, why don't you tell the woman who picked it out?" And so I handed the phone to him, to speak to Debbie, to pass on the compliment still on the phone. He passed on the kind word to Debbie. He handed me back my phone. We smiled, and as I walked out, he said, "Hey, buddy." I said, "Yeah?" He says, "Your yarmulke." I said, "Yeah?" He says, "It matches too." And I turned back with a big grin on my face and said, "Shabbat Shalom." The entire exchange lasted less than a minute. It was as brief as it was mundane. One small step for the Jewish people, one huge leap for humanity. Mine, his, all of yours. We can all be more decent. We can all perform acts of kindness. As Anne Frank famously wrote, no one need wait a moment before making the world better. The power of an act of kindness, when it serves no ulterior purpose, is, in the words of a dear friend, that it is a net happiness aggregator. Both the person doing the kind deed and the person receiving the kind deed feel better for it. A ripple effect and a virtuous cycle that knows no end. It could be something momentous, like the sound of the shofar, uveshofar gadol yitaka, or it could be a still small voice of a quiet deed, kol demama daka yishama. It is the hours I recall watching my mother willing to spend time with a friend in need. It is my memory as a child watching my father perform CPR on a man having a heart attack in the parking lot outside of Dodger Stadium. It is a bit of advice, counsel, and maybe introduction you can give to a young man or a woman looking to get their foothold in this world. It is the act of tzedakah you extend to help someone make ends meet or maybe go to college. Some sources argue that the highest form of kindness is when it's done anonymously. We may be familiar with the Talmudic tale of the Lamed Vavniks, the 36 people whose selfless deeds of kindness performed in anonymity sustain this world. I believe there is a place for both private and public acts of kindness, not because of the need for recognition, but because conspicuous role models are also important. These days, people are wondering who will step up and lead by example. Someone needs to be first, and that someone may just be you. As Rabbi Salanter taught, when there is much evil in the world and people are in great need of models of goodness, why would a truly righteous person want to keep his acts of goodness hidden? Being decent is not easy. It takes strength and it takes courage. It's not just about being nice. It means doing things that make you and your interests vulnerable. Decency, as Senator John McCain in that town hall meeting of 2008 grabbing the microphone away from that woman making racist remarks. Decency is Senator Abraham Ribicoff going off script in order to stand up to the Mayor Daley machine at the 68th Democratic National Convention. Decency is the unprecedented move of Teddy Roosevelt inviting Booker T. Washington for dinner at the White House, no matter the political cost. It is Israel's President Rivlin announcing that if, as president, he must sign the recently passed nation-state law, the one demoting Arabic as an official language, then he would do so in protest in Arabic. Decency is not only the refusal to gossip about another, but the act of telling the person engaged in the practice that you want no part in what they are doing and what they are doing is wrong. It could be as simple as a kind word or as momentous as a gracious and undeserved act of forgiveness. It could be telling someone you love a truth that he or she needs to hear, not, God forbid, to cause them hurt, but because better you someone who loves them than someone who doesn't. Acts of decency will not necessarily make you popular. They can be impossible calls of judgment that force us to dig deep, lest we forget the abiding image of these holidays is that of Abraham, who was asked to sacrifice that which was dearest to him in order to serve the calling of the hour. As Martin Luther King taught, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Or if you like, and a bit closer to home, b'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel liot ish. In a place where there is no humanity, strive to be human. Is it enough if each of us in this room commits to acts of kindness, small and large, mundane and extraordinary, anonymous and public? Will it turn the tide? I don't know, and I can make no promise. But given the state of play in our world today, it's as good a place to start as any. As Rabbi Salanter once wrote, "When I was a young man, I wanted to change the world. Now, as an old man, I realize the only thing I can change is myself. But I've come to recognize that if long ago I had started with myself, then I could have made an impact on my family. And my family and I, we could have made an impact on our town. And that in turn could have changed the country, and we could all indeed have changed the world." Friends, years from now, our children, our grandchildren, history books will ask what we did in this decisive hour. We've arrived at synagogue today to dig deep, knowing that we are living through history. We seek to be reminded not of who we are, but who it is we aspire to be. And we commit to being that person. We commit to taking that commitment into our families, into our city, and into the world. Today, tomorrow, and the next day, in private and public, to close the gap between the world as it is and the world as it ought to be. And in so doing, make this indecent world of ours a little more decent. Shana Tova.